Dr. Jessica Zucker. I am so honored to be speaking with you today. I have had the lucky privilege of having an advanced copy of your manuscript, and it is swoon worthy. It is everything I and this world need right now. I cannot tell you how moved I was by this book and how many times was getting choked up reading it. I am so excited for this conversation.
This means the world to me, and it is so wonderful to connect with you. And I think you are an extraordinary human, and I can't wait to dive in.
It's so mutual. So I was wondering if we could just start at the highest level. One of the first lines that jumped that jumped out at me in your book was, if I did something wrong and this is my fault, that means maybe I can do things differently next time around and therefore change the outcome. That really complicated interrelationship between shame and control.
Yes.
It resonated so much. Why do you think this mentality persists, particularly among highly successful women in 2025?
hmm Yes. So that example, I think, comes from a story about miscarriage, but I think it applies to so many aspects. Sorry, so many aspects of women's lives. Hold on, this is falling out.
No
Uh,
problem.
and I think that when we are told through culture that if we try hard enough, we can achieve it, right? So we're sort of fed that from the get-go. And a lot of life falls outside of that rubric, but a lot of it does. So I think we become accustomed to, if I put my all in, I will achieve it. I will get into that school. I will get that job. I will, win that award. But when it comes to things like pregnancy and other things that we typically can't control, I mean, we can't even control if we get that job, actually, even if we have a perfect resume. But I think that this is our way of thinking that if we just do more, are more, perform more, put ourselves out there even more, we will get whatever it is we want in that moment. And the goalposts change, right? So it's like, I got this, so maybe now I want that, and it can become an endless, rat race of wanting more, more, more. And it can be quite humbling, dare I say, sometimes traumatic when we can't actually secure whatever it is we think we want.
That resonates so deeply. What is a better perspective or mindset that allows us to tap into our perseverance and grit and hard work, but also allows us to accept these things that are out of our control, that are not advanced by us just leaning into it harder, that are a natural part of life?
I mean, I think the clearest and kind of hardest answer to this question is actually embracing our vulnerability and realizing that we are human and therefore we are not immortal and we are not superhuman, even though a lot of us, try to be and think we are sometimes superwoman. You know, what does it mean to have limitations? What does it feel like to be incredibly capable, but still not be able sometimes to get everything that we think we desire? And I think, we all have to ask ourselves what it means to sit in this place of, is it okay to not have it all of the time? And
Yep.
even if you're the brightest and even if you are capable of everything, life happens. You get sick, your partner goes out of town, you fall on the way to work, your car breaks down. Like there's so many things outside of our control that slow us down. And of course, we get annoyed, angry, frustrated. But when we reflect on not being able to show up fully, can we look at the psychological elements within that and get more comfortable with the messiness of life rather than, making sure that the to-do list is checked off at the end of every day?
Amen. Part of what I try to focus on in moments like that is how much a part of the human experience the mess of life is, and remind myself of some kind of silver lining that this is making me that much more empathetic, that much more grateful for the happy times.
Yes.
But
And
my goodness, it's
flexible, and
yes.
resilient. It's just being like, oh, I had a plan for the day. It didn't go that way. And how can I pivot? And what does that mean? And how do we model that for our children, for our colleagues, you know, so that they can see that we don't fall apart because one thing didn't go our way. And I think it's easier said than done, of course, but I think we can all sort of benefit from trying to shore this up and trying to kind of learn from these moments in our lives.
I love that. I
I
love
don't
that.
think I'm making much sense this morning, but anyway, I hope I
You
am.
are making extraordinary sense to
Oh,
me, my
okay,
friend.
good. I'm glad. I'm like, what am I even saying? Okay.
No, you're great. You're
Okay.
great. So much of your book, in my humble reading at least, is about bringing these hard things, these realities of life, the messiness of life out into the open. You give this incredible example of Betty Ford coming out and talking about her mastectomy, and the irony is not lost on me that she was influenced to do so after the cover-ups of Watergate, the the mess of outside of her control that
Yes.
then it sounded like urged her to come forth with this really personal story, and the benefit that comes when we talk about hard things out loud and as a community. Why do you think it is still so hard for people, especially women, to say, I can't do this alone? And what have you found um, gets people talking about those vulnerable moments?
I think it's hard for people to ask for help or do it alone because culture says somehow that this is weakness, that this shows excruciating vulnerability, that we should tamp down and hide from the public, and that we should be able to kind of charge through, that we should chart a path of you know, perfection despite going through something life-changing like breast cancer. I
Yeah.
myself have been incredibly open about my experience with breast cancer. I was diagnosed 2 weeks after my first book came out, and it was quite disheartening to see a lot of the comments that came spewing toward me in the aftermath of my announcement of it.
Ugh.
Yeah, I mean, I thought because I had built this whole community around miscarriage and I felt like people knew me inside and out through that, I didn't feel comfortable keeping it to myself, right? I felt like, oh, well, I'll continue to normalize talking about hard things by sharing this incredibly scary diagnosis with my community. And interestingly, this is different people feel different ways about the language. Oh God, my gardeners are here. Can you hear them?
Don't
No.
worry, I
Okay,
got
okay, good.
you.
Okay. Um, different people feel different ways about the language that surrounds a lot of things that take place in women's lives. And for example, a lot of the language that came toward me when I expressed that I was diagnosed was like, you're a warrior, you've got this, you're so strong, you're going to beat this. And it's all well meaning and it all comes from a place of love and support. And yet, it was interesting because I was sitting in such a vulnerable place of like, will I live? Will I die? Like, what is about to happen to me? What is going on in my body? How did this even happen? And somehow the warrior language and kind of getting into this battle language, this like idea that if I don't try hard enough, quote unquote, maybe I won't beat it. So it's fascinating because I don't hear us talking about cancer, men's cancers. You know, men can, of course, get breast cancer, but I don't hear these words kind of thrown at men in the same way that I do women. And again, there's nothing wrong with the word warrior, and I totally get the spirit of it. It's just saying you're amazing and you'll get through this. But what I think it misses is this idea of vulnerability and leaning into our pain and our fear. And I think sometimes people's responses are proof that culture has said, hey, let's stay as far away from grief and the hard stuff as possible. So let's go on with our platitudes and you're going to beat it. And you're the warrior and you are strong. What if you don't feel strong? What
Yeah.
if you die? Does that mean you didn't try hard enough? Like, what I mean is, like, it puts the onus on women in a way that is not necessarily fair and doesn't, it is also just not scientifically correct either.
Wow.
Right. So I think that that's a good example of how, in general, just go, just do it. You've got this. But what if some days we don't, or we don't
Yeah.
want to, or we
Yep.
can't, or we want to sit in the mess and say, today I need help?
Oh, my goodness. I can only imagine, probably can't imagine what it felt like to be sitting on the other side of this community with whom you had shared so much of yourself and to hear this back in a way that didn't resonate.
I mean, it just
And
showed me that like we still have miles to go when it comes to normalizing talking about hard things. And like I felt like I had made such a dent within the pregnancy loss community. Like, let's say this and not this. Let's say this, but not this. And then when it came to something totally new, people were relying on sort of the cultural norm and the platitudes that swirl. And it made sense. So I didn't take it personally, but I was like, wow, so many different traumas can leave us feeling kind of isolated and alone when we need community the most, and our communities want to be there. But we're
yes,
kind of put in a position of having to educate them about how best to be there for us, which is
yes,
kind of ironic and difficult when you are the one that's feeling down and out.
yeah. You're also, this anecdote, it's reminding me a lot of the section in your book where you talk about hitting a wall. And by the age of, I think you said 15 or so, girls, soon to be women, are taught to shrink themselves and to kind of silence themselves. And it occurs to me that that language around being a warrior or fighting through it puts the onus on that person to go into a hole, fight it, and
Yep,
emerge once it's over.
exactly.
And that, I know even from my own experience, so much of my unwillingness to ask for help in retrospect has been not wanting to bother other people
Mm,
and wanting to shrink and silence and minimize myself and my needs and my inconveniences.
mhm.
And it's taken a lot of work to be open about that, and I find myself even talking to my daughters about this and encouraging them to ask for help. And to be totally honest with you, it feels odd sometimes
Yeah.
because we are so culturally conditioned to shrink, minimize, not be a problem. I'm putting that in air quotes, not be a problem.
Yes.
And I know they will be healthier
Mm.
people, healthier humans for the ability to take up space.
Exactly, exactly. Yes, yes, yes. So why do you think though you felt like it would be a bother to people to ask for help?
It's a really good question. I think I have these memories of even sitting in a middle school classroom, and, in my experience, middle school is where girls' confidence goes to die, or at least
That's
my own
right.
did.
Yep.
And, you know, hearing this chatter from people in the classroom when I would be the first to raise my hand with an answer, or I'd have something audacious to say, and I'd be so proud of myself
Oh,
in that kind of childhood way.
I
And,
love it.
so much of this stage of adulthood for me is trying to tap back into that
Mm,
and help maintain that in my kids, and or at least set them up
incredible.
to be the most resilient to the, you know, winds of the world that I know
Yes.
will stand to erode some of that. But, it's taken a long time. And frankly, a huge part of why we started Duckbill to normalize and
Mm.
destigmatize asking for help. To,
Yes.
dare I say, as this former middle school nerd, like try to make it kind of cool to ask for help.
Uh-huh, totally. Well, so how can it become cool? I mean, I want to talk about that because the idea of Duckbill making our lives easier while so we can do the things that we want to do and offload the things we don't want to have to attend to as pointedly, um,
Yeah.
that is revolutionary. And yet, how do we get people to understand that this is something that will improve their lives and that it's okay to need it, to want it, to use it?
Yes, yes, amen. You know, one really interesting thing that I've found is that people who have been taught the value of delegation in their professional lives are more comfortable doing it in their personal lives. But there's still a hump for many of us, even those of us who have been taught and rewarded for asking for help professionally, to do so personally.
Right.
And it often takes hearing from a friend of yours saying, "Here's what I outsource. Here's what I use Duckbill
Yes.
for." And
Right.
in that way, that community has been so empowering to
Mm,
hear that other people are asking for help in this way, other people that we admire. Do you
exactly.
find, what does asking for help look like for you emotionally, logistically, practically, even
Mm.
outside of Duckbill? Where do you find either the types of items or the kind of help you seek? Where do where have you started? Where would be a place for someone to start?
It's a really important question. I feel like it started by having a nanny when my kids were young, just like knowing that if I am working and my husband is working, we need help.
Yeah.
And then having to kind of figure all of that out. And I do think that for me personally, a lot of the reason I don't ask for help is often because the help that I locate doesn't feel like it's as helpful as I want it to be. Like it ends up
Yes.
being more work for me
Yeah.
to help that person understand. Like, for example, I don't even have help with social media. And there have been times when I've flirted with the idea of like, oh my goodness, I need somebody to help me because who has time for this? And maybe this would improve my life if I had this time back.
Yeah.
But then, I talked to a bunch of people. Everyone was lovely and had great ideas, but it was like, it was just so clear to me that having somebody really be able to capture my voice, for example, it wasn't going to happen. It's just like, so that's, I think, what's difficult about
Yeah.
this idea of help sometimes. It's like no one can do it like you do it. And
Yeah.
it's not comfortable to allow yourself to be like, okay, this person won't do it like I do it, but it's going to be good enough, or it's going to be great, but just in a different way. And
Yes.
so, bringing the nanny in, knowing that she was capable and loving and wonderful, but she's not the parent, and I think that that's an interesting kind of experience, having to bring somebody into your household. And I don't think, the nannies get enough credit. So that's why I'm talking about it. Um,
Amen.
but that's the help, I think it starts there. And then, um, but I will say with my book, I was going through a lot because of the medication I take for the breast cancer. And I was having real trouble finding the time and mainly the energy to get to the finish line with this book. And so eventually I turned to a bunch of writers, authors, people I know in the community. And I was like, I must hire an outside editor to get me there. And thank God I did, because she rocked it. She was incredible. And again, is her voice exactly like mine? Is her writing style like mine? It's not, but she was so present and professional and on top of it. And I felt so held through the end of the process. And I really do credit her with actually getting to a finished product. I mean, I just don't think I could have done it without her. So, in that way, I think asking for help can kind of be life-saving and life-changing. And then on a more sort of psychological level, asking for help, I always have my therapist in my back pocket.
Amen.
Right. So
Yep.
when I lived in Boston, so in my graduate school days, I was going more consistently, and now I just call upon her when I sort of want to talk something through or need her perspective. And, I know that that's not a resource everybody has access to or is interested in. But for me, as a psychologist myself, I do believe so much in therapy and talking out the problems,
Yes.
the hard stuff, the pain. And so, yeah, I think leaning on somebody else and somebody else's expertise and perspectives can be revolutionary, honestly.
I love that. What what have your editor and therapist done to help you feel, as you said so beautifully, feel held through the process? I think about this a lot in Duckbill's context, where a lot of Duckbill members still want to maintain the ability to make the decision, to make the call. These are mission critical, super personal things. And yet they'd really value decision support and the thought
Mm.
partner or someone to move the ball forward once the decision has been made. And I'm so curious, how do those special people that helped you in these crisis moments, how did they help you feel supported through those processes?
I think the fact that the outside editor created an outline, like she was basically like, she looked at the manuscript and she emailed me back, I've got you, we've got this, totally doable. I mean, it was like just her, I think her ease with it, uh, and her confidence around it. And then having a concrete plan that showed me that, like, when we would get which thing completed. And actually, just having her there, knowing that she was comfortable, she was confident, I too felt more present in the process. And
Wow.
so I found myself then writing all weekend long. So when she wasn't working on it, I would go back in and just go crazy with the manuscript. And
Yeah.
so it was as if, because writing is it can be such a singular, can be such a sort of isolating and lonely process in a way.
Yeah.
And so knowing someone was there, even when she wasn't there, uh, just knowing that the whole book and the pages were all being thought about by somebody else,
Yes.
it was it was profound for me. It just made all the difference. It made me feel more energized. I felt safer. I felt I could relax, but it also made me actually more capable of doing the work in an interesting way.
That makes so much sense. I mean, what I hear you describing, and this is my bias as a team manager, is a team. You know,
Exactly. I'm without a team for most of the things that I do.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And you know that we hear that feedback from people too, that it's not just the tactical support of making the phone call, booking the appointment, making the transaction. It's feeling taken care of. It's
exactly.
feeling like you have a team in your corner. One of my favorite Duckbill anecdotes was from someone who had just lost their mother. They were in a leadership role at work. They had two little kids. They were trying to plan Thanksgiving, and a pipe burst in their home, and
Oh
they weren't going to
no.
be able to host their family as they had planned. And our co-pilots not only helped set up a external location for the meal, but also sent her a bouquet of flowers saying, "We're so sorry. You're dealing with a lot right now." And she sent us the most beautiful note saying, "I spend my life taking care of others. And finally, with Duckbill, I feel like someone's taking care of me." And you reminded me of that when you were describing the role that your editor played. It wasn't just about editing,
Exactly.
writing. It was
No,
about helping you feel taken care of,
that's
helping
right.
be that teammate. That's
That's
so
right.
beautiful.
Yes.
Has that changed your understanding of what it means to be a good psychologist, a good author, a good
Hmm.
parent? I'm putting this in air quotes because
Right,
that
of
is such a
course.
loaded phrase, but has any of this evolved your perspective on that?
That's a really important question. I think I've I think I've been somebody throughout my life who has been open to help, but I think that it helped me realize that because of my chosen profession and because I run my own business and because I don't work in teams, that when it comes to my own mental health, doing something as big as a book, I have to have support. And so it has made me realize that in order to be a better author or a better, more confident writer, I need to turn to other people and say, I've got this idea, but the execution piece right now is not there for me, or whatever it is that I'm struggling with at the time. And so I think the problem is partly that we're taught to think it's binary. It's like, I'm either successful or I'm a failure, or I've got this or I don't have it at all. And it's like, well, wait, what's the place in the middle? And this is where I think it gets deeply psychological. Like, why
Mm.
do we think it's all or nothing? It's not. You're still an amazing writer, even if you need the help of another writer. Or, you're still an incredible mother if you need the help of Duckbill to plan your kid's birthday party. I mean, so we can be wonderful and amazing and successful and want and need help.
Oh, that is the most beautiful articulation, not only of, I think, the human experience, but so much of what we hear every day. And my intuition and my own experience is that we're prone to that kind of black and white thinking, especially when we're in a moment of stress.
Yes,
And it can be particularly hard to recognize
that's
that
true.
when you're feeling unsuccessful, defeated, vulnerable.
Yes.
Um, are there any pieces of advice that you would have, and I can guess what they may be, having read your gorgeous book, for people who are feeling vulnerable, defeated, to kind of break out of that cycle
Mm,
of isolation, black and white thinking?
mm. Yes. It depends, in some ways, sort of how historical that is. Like if most things in someone's life is black and white, that might be a little more difficult to give tips about.
Sure.
But I think, like, for example, I would call my husband when he would be out of town during that brief period when I was like, I'm not finishing the book. I'm gonna call the publisher and let them know that, like,
Yes.
it's not gonna happen, and he's like talked me off the ledge. And so
Yes.
that felt kind of black and white. Like it was like, I can't do it. Um, and
Totally.
of course there was a part of me that knew I could. I had written another one and like I was almost there. I mean, and I think it's okay to flirt with those moments of like, maybe I can't, and like what does that look like? What does that mean? And then though, to be able to remind ourselves. And hopefully, people have this in their sort of history that they can call upon, or they can look at their resume, even on paper in black and white, and be able to say, I did that. So, reminding ourselves, I think sometimes that's the best way to sort of call in a sense of resilience when we can remember that in the past we have persevered, or if we can call a friend even who can remind us, that we're not just one thing, that we're all these other things as well. Um,
Yes.
because writers go through this a lot, thinking like, I suck, like I have nothing to say. I can't believe that I thought that what I, wanted to convey matters. And it's all the people around them that need to say, look, you might think that right now, but I'm going to remind you of X, Y, and Z. And so even there
Yes.
were times when I would just scroll through my Instagram posts from years ago and look at the things that I was trying to inspire others to do, or things that I was saying about the complexities of grief, pregnancy loss, and life after. And I would scratch my head and be like, oh, actually, you've got a lot to say. I do like how I say it. And today, I'm just not able to find those words, and maybe tomorrow I will. So I
Oh,
think, the tips are really like trying to remind oneself of your history, what you have been capable of. Try to think of those in your life that you can truly rely on and open up to, that are trusted, friends and loved ones, and they can maybe be the reminder for you. And also to kind of switch up the environment. Like I think sometimes people like think like, I'm gonna, double down and I will sit at my computer all day and write. Well, actually, maybe you just need to go exercise, and the perspective of like seeing birds and smelling the earth will actually inspire a new train of thought, or at least get something moving in some way.
ah, yes. Calling on your team, calling on that past resilience, and empowering yourself to go get a breath of fresh air,
Yes.
literally or metaphorically, whatever
Yep.
that means for you.
Yes.
Ah,
And it's just like, again, it comes back to the humanity in all of us, and the fact that like we are not machines and we don't need to be. And we do need to honor the fragility of our bodies and our minds sometimes. And that if we didn't get a good night's sleep, or a baby was up all night, or our child is sick, or we're getting sick, or this, stuff happening in the world. I mean, there's just so many elements that we can't necessarily block out in order to be robotic. And we have to build in room for that to be okay. And or we need resources like Duckbill to actually be able to take care of things for us when we just can't.
Jessica, I am going to leave it there because I could not have imagined a more perfect summary of why we started this company or what gets us out of bed every morning. I also just want to say, going back to those moments of doubt that, are so human, when you are having them, you let me know. And I will tell you that you are an incredible author, an incredible psychologist, an incredible human, and the world needs what you have to say. Truly, my life has been changed in the
Oh,
short couple of weeks since knowing you and reading Normalize It. The world is so lucky to have this book. Go online, order Normalize It by Dr. Jessica Zucker. I am so excited to be distributing this book to so many of our teammates and friends of Duckbill. It is so very consistent with our mission and the life that we hope the Duckbill community can lead, where it is normal to be human and we are each other's team in helping get through those very normal, natural, hard human times.